Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Sumner, registered dietitian, focusing on helping men and women end binge eating, end food guilt, and finally say yes to life. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not substitute for medical and personalized advice. I just want to say a big thank you to those who have messaged me saying in the first episode of the Breaking Your Fear series that it was really helpful. So the first episode was on breaking your fear of carbs, and it was really well received by you guys, so thank you so much. So in today's episode, I'm going to help you go through one of the biggest hurdles through binge eating recovery, which is the challenge of having breakfast. If you've been struggling with binge eating, you might know all too well of the battle of trying to avoid breakfast because, well, since you had a massive binge the previous night, you're probably promising yourself, probably for the 10th time, that's it. Time to diet even harder than last time. This time it's gonna be different. I'm gonna stick to my diet for good. So you skip breakfast in an attempt to make up for how much you've eaten during your binge last night. And I get it. That was completely me. But we need to realize, and I want you to think, is this your first time you're skipping breakfast to make up for your binge last night? Is it probably your 10th time trying to skip breakfast in an attempt to change things, shall I say? So I want you to think, what is keeping you going to think things are going to be different this time? One of the best things you can truly do to prevent further binges from happening again is to simply have breakfast. And more importantly, to have breakfast the day after you've had a binge. That's when it's most important. Because if you think of it, one of the main triggers of binge eating is simply hunger. A great analogy I like to use is, you know the feeling when you hold your breath for so long? Then the moment you start to gasp for air, you start to gasp for much more air to make up for the lost breath you had, to simply keep your body going. The same goes with binge eating. When we restrict ourselves from the amount of food our body requires to function properly throughout the day, our body's going to turn those alarm bells, shall I say, and signal for more food. But if you try to ignore it, it could possibly turn into a binge episode, just like gasping for as much air if you were to hold your breath. So try to avoid holding your breath, shall I say, in the morning by skipping breakfast in an attempt to make up for your binge. I understand and empathize. It can be really difficult to worry about how much food you've eaten last night, and on top of that, if you were to have breakfast after that, you'd think you might gain even more weight. But I completely understand all your fears, and I was there when I was struggling with binge eating. But I can assure you, having breakfast for me was one of the greatest things I could have ever done to bring me out of that binge restrict cycle. And I want you to remember, even if you've eaten a large amount of food last night, you could still be deficient in certain minerals and vitamins, which most breakfast foods could provide, such as iron, folic acid, B vitamins for energy, and many more which can be found in fortified breakfast cereals, as an example. A deficiency or lack of these nutrients, which we'd normally nourish ourselves with in the morning, could lead to low levels of energy, possibly lower blood sugar levels, and increased cravings throughout the day. If you skip breakfast, all of these things are going to be against you. And on top of this, your hunger hormones work by a pattern. It's important to know your hunger hormones can adapt to a pattern and are very flexible. So if you're restricting throughout the day and having binge episodes mostly at night, then you're indirectly training your body to not be hungry in the day. And all of a sudden, around the evening time, if this was your binge time, all of a sudden you'd feel extreme hunger. I understand and recognize your fears. I really do. Because when I struggle with my binge eating episodes, I also skip breakfast and lunch very frequently. I tried intermittent fasting, which is a form of dieting, really time-restricted eating, which it is, where I would essentially just have black coffee for breakfast in the morning. On a side note, I didn't really enjoy black coffee. I just found it so bitter, but I kind of forced myself to have it just because I thought it would blunt my hunger or keep me full in the morning. I proudly remember telling people that I was intermittent fasting to show my willpower and grit that I can go against my hunger, only to find myself binging in the evening. So, essentially, I was just having one meal a day. I made an excuse that I was now following the OMAD diet, which is the 1 meal a day diet, in an attempt to mask that I was actually struggling and really putting myself in these guilt-filled, toxic, painful binge restrict cycles. So eating breakfast was a game changer for my binge recovery, and I really can't stress it enough that breakfast isn't bad. So the next time you bring food to the table for breakfast, I want you to do these 6 steps to practice mindful eating during breakfast time. Number 1, make yourself a breakfast you know that would nourish you. One that contains a source of fruit or veg, so that could be blueberries, starchy carbohydrates, which could be bread, protein, a fried egg, and a fat source, such as butter, for example. So this meal could look like toast with fried egg and butter, with blueberries on the side. So including fruit or veg, plus 3 macronutrient sources, which is your protein, fats, and carbs, together into your breakfast, or ideally, each meal you have, will ensure that you're staying comfortably full. If this might sound a bit too complex, then just simply have anything for breakfast. Try to avoid skipping breakfast, so even if it is a set of pancakes or cereal with milk, the top priority, your number 1 priority, is to simply have breakfast. And then second priority is to focus on the quality and including the carb source, the protein source, fat source, and a fruit and veg source. Number 2, the next time you have your breakfast, I want you to reframe your thoughts before you start preparing breakfast. I want you to reframe any judgmental thoughts. Thoughts coming from a place of guilt are not welcome during breakfast time. So turn these thoughts of breakfast from guilt into self-care. Remember that you're nourishing your body after a long period of not eating. Even if you binged, you've gone a long time without nourishing yourself during your sleep. Remember, food is energy, and we don't want to feel exhausted, feeling low in blood sugar levels, feeling that we're having some cravings in the morning. Number 3, I want you to take a bite, taste your breakfast, and think, what is happening in your mouth right now? What flavors are there? What's the temperature like? What textures do you notice? What do you taste? Does it bring back any nostalgic memories that you could possibly associate with the meal? So if I asked you to describe the meal in 5 words, what would you say? Number 4, I want you to pause, breathe, and challenge any food police thoughts. Remind yourself that we're not thinking like that today. You might have had guilt-filled episodes in the past if you struggled with binge eating, especially last night. But those guilt-filled thoughts are staying there in the past. I want you to remember that eating is a form of self-care, self-nourishment, and appreciation for your body. Number 5, I want you to enjoy your meal until you've had enough, when you're comfortably full and satisfied. I want you to decide when you've had enough, and by how you feel. Remember that you don't have to finish everything on your plate. Even if you're full, listen to how your body feels. Try to find those internal cues and ignore those external cues, such as, I need to finish everything on my plate because think of the kids in Africa, or I'm very privileged to have this. I want you to listen to those internal cues to train your body to focus on, okay, this is what feeling comfortably full feels like. Trying to find those internal cues is very crucial to training yourself to mindfully eat and get used to those proper hunger cues. Number 6, then after finishing your meal, I want you to have a moment to reflect on, what was the experience like for you? How do you feel? Are you feeling anxious? If so, why? I want you to challenge those thoughts. Remember that just because it is a thought doesn't mean it's correct. Reflecting and being mindful during these difficult times is about showing yourself that you're stronger than those anxious or fear-filled thoughts. Remind yourself regularly that during breakfast, that self-care is a priority. Your mental health is a priority, and your physical health is a priority. So breakfast is one of the most important meals for binge eating recovery, because we're following and listening to our body and what it needs. And I can't stress this enough, because for my personal binge eating recovery journey, it really made everything so much more easier. You're training your body to appreciate that there is no risk of starvation anymore. And coming from me, once again, that it really helped me get rid of those 24/7 food thoughts. It helped me reduce my cravings. And when I would have something I really enjoy, I wouldn't lose control whenever I would eat them. I wouldn't eat the whole packet. I wouldn't have several packets, because your body appreciates that, okay, there's no risk of starvation, so there's no need for me to binge eat. There's no need for me to hoard food, because there's no famine coming, is what your body's saying. I want you to think of the last time you really, really, really had to go to the toilet. I bet you couldn't think of anything else other than trying to hold it in and just find a toilet as soon as possible. And the moment you do find the toilet and do your business, then the thoughts and worries just disappear. The same goes with breakfast and food thoughts. The longer we go without food, the more we're going to think about food. And there's nothing wrong or broken about you when you're having obsessive food thoughts. It's just our body's way of protecting us. And the moment we go against our body's natural need for really anything, then it will start to go against us. And it's not something to be mad about. It's just your body trying to protect you. The moment we start to go against our body's urges, it will really start to turn up the volume, telling you it needs something. And if you're binge eating and you're starting to have these obsessive food thoughts, it's telling you it needs some nutrition, it needs some energy. And whilst I'm saying you should have breakfast, I really don't want to sound like a broken record. And I appreciate that it's really hard. It's very scary. But the first time you have breakfast after a long time will be the most scary it will ever be. Then the rest will start to feel less scary once you start to recognize that your cravings will go down. You'll recognize that, okay, I'm starting to trust my body now, and I start to turn down those alarm signals. I clearly remember going to work only to find myself staring at those cupcakes in the office. As a hospital dietitian, I noticed that if I skipped breakfast, I'd easily have 3 cupcakes and stop there. But inside my heart, I knew I could finish 6. I could finish the whole packet if I wanted to, but I tried to be professional. But when I'd have a balanced, nourishing breakfast beforehand, I would probably have 1 and feel satisfied. I probably won't have any urge to have any more, because my body appreciates that I had breakfast, I was nourished earlier, and there's no psychological pressure for me to hoard the cupcakes. During my binge eating recovery, I had this mindset personally of the longer I wait, the later I'll eat, and the less I would have to eat throughout the day. But what I personally failed to recognize that the longer I wait, the hungrier I got. Then the more I thought about food, and the more I'd start to lose control around food the moment I'd start to eat. So, if that is you, because that definitely was me, I want you to think to yourself, what might happen? What might happen if you honored your hunger early in the day? What might happen if you prioritize eating something filling and nourishing in the morning? What do you think might happen if you try to stop pushing your meals further on? Do you think that you might be able to have less urges to eat more? Do you think that if you honored your hunger in the morning, that you'd have less food thoughts throughout the day? You might feel less out of control when you start to eat? You don't know until you try, but let's say that eating breakfast was what contributed to me ending my binge eating episodes. So I want you to experiment with this. Try to have breakfast and follow the 6 steps to practice mindful eating when you're having breakfast. So I'll place a link in the description of this podcast for the 6 steps to practice mindful eating. Remember that if you've been avoiding breakfast for so long, only to find yourself binging later again and again, you've tried skipping breakfast for so long and nothing has changed. You're still binging. So at least experiment with maybe just having one breakfast and experiment with yourself. See how your urges change. That's my challenge for you after listening to this podcast. So if you found this episode helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you rated this podcast well so other people can find food freedom and peace with breakfast time. I truly remember hiding and masking my restriction as either intermittent fasting back in the day or being part of the 1 meal a day tribe, which was disastrous for my binge eating recovery. But realizing that restriction was a massive trigger for binges and nourishing myself was a key to restoring my hunger cues. So if you struggle with breakfast or you struggle with disordered eating habits or binge eating, then I offer one-to-one coaching to support you through your binge eating recovery journey. Click the link in my bio to learn more about how I can help you. And alternatively, you can join my binge eating freedom course, which is also in the link in the description of this podcast. Remember that you're never alone and that I'm always here with you to support you through this difficult and challenging period of recovery. I know you can do it, so I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, you would definitely benefit from my binge eating freedom course in my website, bingedietitian.com. Learn more about the triggers to why you're binge eating and how to stop binge eating for good. No more food guilt, no more jumping from diet to diet, and no more shame. Go to the link in this episode for my binge eating freedom course to be one step closer to being binge free, starting today.